Games Workshop has a problem, and it's a relatively simple problem they're trying to solve, and it's, well, they want to make more money because they're a company, and that's what companies tend to do. Their solution is also pretty straightforward. Take their major games and issue a new release or a new edition every 3 years. For Warhammer 40k, this started back in 7th edition in 2014, 8th in 2017, 2020, 2023. You can see how that's working out there. Let's take a look at Age of Sigmar. Now the Wikipedia for Age of Sigmar is a little bit messier, but first edition here was 2015. Second edition was down in 2018. Third edition 2021. And finally, fourth edition was 2024. Of course, if you think about a 3-year cycle and you've got 2 major game products, well, you can tell there's 1 year where you've got nothing major to announce, nothing big to release, unless, of course, you count paints, which apparently the rumor this year is like a pro line of paints in a dropper bottle. So, you know, the same kind of quality you expect from Games Workshop, but in a smaller bottle. Everyone's going to win that way. However, what this really practically means is you've got 1 year of a really happy Kevin Roundtree when it comes to the financial report, 1 year of a meh, and 1 year of a sad Kevin Roundtree. And that's not my opinion, that's actually coming from their annual statements. Let's take a look at last year's statement that was released back in July of 2024. Now, Games Workshop's financial year goes from June to June. So this document right here is covering the period from June 2023 to the very beginning of June of 2024, which, as we know from the Wikipedia entries a moment ago, that covers the period of the release of Warhammer 40,000 10th edition in June 2023. All right, let's look at this one paragraph right here. We aim for many more years of profitable growth and for all our customers to continue to enjoy their hobby. So every year as we plan for the next few, we continue to set the sales volume bar higher. As I wrote in 2021, it is still worth noting that historically the launch year of a new Warhammer 40,000 edition is normally the financial high point, until the next edition of Warhammer 40,000. I'm stating the facts. Warhammer 40,000 is still our best-selling range of products. We have an ambitious plan for the next period. Time will tell whether it was good enough. So what Games Workshop is pointing out here is they're kind of telling their investors to be a little cautious that from June 2024 to middle of 2025, revenue might not be as high because, well, there's no new edition of Warhammer 40,000, but wait a minute, we just saw a little bit ago that there was a new edition of Age of Sigmar. Shouldn't that be doing really well? Well, Games Workshop never formally says exactly how well 40k and Age of Sigmar, their sales compare to each other. Obviously right here they mention that 40k is the best-selling product line they have. That doesn't mean that Age of Sigmar is necessarily bad, but let's take a look at one other piece of data you probably saw floating around the internet last year. ICV2 put out this list of top miniature lines for fall of 2024. This is the list that kind of made it into that slide from Gamma. And the important thing to note here is that Warhammer Age of Sigmar was in 4th place, in particular behind Battletech. Now, I may be selling our friends at Catalyst Game Labs a little bit short, but I don't see Battletech doing anywhere near as well as Warhammer 40,000 in terms of sales. And if this is an accurate representation of the independent retail market, well, that historically is approximately 40% of Games Workshop sales in any given year. That would lead me to a conservative estimate that Warhammer 40k is outselling Age of Sigmar by as maybe 5 to 1, maybe even more. So getting back to the original topic, because the fact that Games Workshop wants to make even more money, they've now got this empty year and they want to fill it with something that's going to make them a lot of money that maybe is kind of like Warhammer 40,000. So let's talk about some of their other games that might be able to join onto this 3-year release cycle and possibly boost the revenue of Games Workshop every 3 years. First up, of course, is Middle-earth Battles. This is their licensed Lord of the Rings cinema universe that Games Workshop makes a game for, and they've had it for an incredibly long time. And the problem with this particular product is making it on a 3-year cycle is it's a licensed property. Now, I'm not sure if they have some details about how often they can release a new edition for this game in terms of their license agreement with New Line Cinema. But the reality is, with any company, when dealing with a licensed property, there's pretty much always an approval process for anything you create from the actual license holder. So therefore, there's just more bureaucratic overhead for Games Workshop to deal with when releasing new products, whether it be new rules, new miniatures, all that stuff for this game, as compared to any of their original IP properties, whether that's 40K, Fantasy, Age of Sigmar, Horus Heresy, or whatever. So I think that fact alone would probably make this particular game, Middle-earth Battles, not a great choice to put on a 3-year cycle because, well, now you've got a lot more work for the license holders, and they may just get more annoyed with you by trying to want all these approvals all the time. Then you've got Warhammer the Old World, which is sort of in a paradox situation where it's simultaneously Games Workshop's oldest published miniatures game and the newest published miniatures game. Of course, this still is a relatively new in terms of when it was last released, which was last year. I'm not entirely sure how popular it is yet. The annual report for this past year will probably be coming out in about 6 weeks, so definitely want to take a look at that to see how well Old World is actually doing. So maybe later on down the line, this will be a valid game to release every 3 years, but I think at this point it's still kind of new, especially since the world was blown up 10 years ago. It may take a while before Games Workshops want to try to take a fairly ambitious, newer game like this and drop it into that 3-year new edition rotation. Well, of course, that leaves one more game, which happens to be getting a new release, probably later this summer we'll talk about in just a moment, and that is Horus Heresy, which is the prequel to Warhammer 40,000. Now, we'll get to that topic in just a moment, and of course, if you're a fan of tabletop wargaming, you also probably like 3D printing. And if you like 3D printable gaming miniatures and have an FFF 3D printer, I always recommend you check out my line of 3D printable gaming miniatures, the Fractured Colony miniature line over at Fractured Colony. This guy right here is the Griffin. This is the Bracer main battle tank. And sitting back over here behind me are a few other miniatures that are available for sale. And those are all at fracturedcolony.com. All right, let's get back to the main video. So Horus Heresy is probably the best candidate because it's an established game. It's been around for a while now, and therefore it has a fairly established player base. And they've been moving the game over to having more and more plastic miniatures as the years go on, from its original start as mostly resin, Forge World-based kind of thing. And Games Workshop really likes to exploit their intellectual property to make more money, and no, that is not me criticizing them. They use that term themselves in their financial reports. Yes, they use the word exploit when it comes to talking about the intellectual property and exploiting it to make more money. Now, you've probably already seen the new starter set for Horus Heresy. Games Workshop formally announced it a little while ago. Traditionally, GW does not go ahead, announce a new product, and then basically have it come out a long time in the future. So normally once we see a new product being announced, within weeks, if not sometimes that weekend, we can go ahead and get a pre-order on it. Of course, this is not exactly a traditional situation because the existence of this product was leaked on the internet a few weeks before Games Workshop even formally announced it. So who knows when Games Workshop is actually planned to release this thing. I would say this summer would be a good bet. They usually release their new games actually right around this time because it does correspond to the start of their financial year. But with this FAQ page they released about a week ago on the new Saturnine Horus Heresy set, I don't see any mention in here about a release date. I didn't see one in any of the other particular articles on this game, so I don't think we formally have that information yet. So given the fact that Horus Heresy has a new starter set being released in the quote off year for both 40K and Age of Sigmar, it is looking like it's a good candidate to jump on that 3-year train. Now, why 3 years? It does seem kind of arbitrary, but ideally it's probably based a little bit on some market research. Tabletop game companies have the advantage to where they can release a similar set of products every few years, and therefore probably spend less time making a re-release of these similar set of products and making a totally new product line that might fail, and they can market them to all the tabletop game players as a rebalancing. So that kind of strategy is kind of a win-win for everybody. Now there is a bit of a balancing effort there, because if the game companies release new editions too fast, players may revolt and say, screw this, I'm not buying any more products, I'm done, I haven't got enough value out of my existing product line yet to go ahead and spend money on a new one. Games Workshop may have done some testing on this in years past. If you jump back to the Wikipedia article on the history of Warhammer 40,000, you're going to notice that 6th edition was released in 2012, with 7th edition being released only 2 years later. I wonder if that was an experiment to test out how often can we release new editions without ticking off our player base too much. And the research eventually led to 3 years is what the Games Workshop fan base is willing to put up with. And judging by the past set of annual reports, I would say 3 years is working out for them pretty darn well, because their revenue just keeps doing this and this and this and this. If we take a look at a historical chart of Games Workshop's stock price, what you're going to see is relatively flat from 1995 all the way through 2016, which was shortly after this whole process of the 3-year release cycle started taking effect, and then it mostly went up to the moon, except during the Biden administration for some reason. But clearly the stock price has been rewarding Games Workshop for this 3-year release cycle. Well, that is about all I've got for you guys today. Hopefully, if you're a fan of Horus Heresy, you're not going to be too frustrated by a potential 3-year release cycle. The one saving grace might be that between Horus Heresy and the Old World, maybe because these are kind of smaller games in the Games Workshop lineup compared to 40K and Age of Sigmar, maybe what they might do is kind of swap them off. So this year's going to be Horus Heresy, 3 years down the line it's going to be Old World, 3 years after that we'll go back to Horus Heresy, and maybe that would be a good strategy for some of these smaller games. Anyway, that's about all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. And if you like taking a look at some of the financial and business side of the tabletop game market, go ahead and hit subscribe. I've got some interesting videos about cool mini or not in the past, and one coming up in the not too distant future, because it seems like they're still trying to bail some water out of their company. And if you do like 3D printable gaming miniatures, check out fracturedcolony.com for my line of sci-fi gaming miniatures, and to keep tabs on the next crowdfunding campaign, which is going to introduce this guy right here, which is a battle suit. Okay, I'll see you guys all next time.